It all starts with this. This is the ultimate power.
Hello everybody, it's me, your good friend Sparky, and welcome back to Sonic Heroes. Team Rose and Team Chaotix are going to be taking turns as well, and it's time to head back into Grand Metropolis.
Now for the real test. All of you are about to enter Eggman's territory. Are you ready?
Not too late to change your mind.
Why do you think we're here? How else are we gonna make the rent?
Let's go! Here's your next mission. Destroy all Eggman's robots holding the city. Every single one of them.
Isn't that just the state of things? You have to go on a life-risking, world-saving adventure just to make your rent. Feels like a metaphor is in there somewhere for the state of the working economy, but whatever. We're not going to get into that sort of subject here. We're going to get into talking about Sonic Heroes and Team Chaotix a bit more. And this mission is a pretty good example of the Team Chaotix missions sometimes being a bit longer and more trouble than they really need to be. Because for one, we have to destroy a heck of a lot of enemies, which means stopping your progress and going into battles very often, a lot more often than normal. And we also have to defeat not a selection of enemies, but every single one of them. That means all 85 enemies scattered about this stage, we have to make sure we destroy. And if we don't, then what essentially happens in that case is that we have to loop through the stage and then start over from the beginning as we search for whatever enemies we missed. Which means, yeah, if you do miss enemies, you can definitely spend a long time in this stage and on this mission. It's a little bit ridiculous, if I'm being perfectly honest. And, yeah, it does kind of emphasize a problem with the Team Chaotix stages. There is very much a lack of balance when it comes to how difficult their missions are and how long they take to perform them. When it's something like finding the hermit crabs in the first stage, those missions, typically, they don't take very long, and if you get a good idea of where the hermit crabs are, you can get through the stage in relatively quick time. And also, there's usually a lot more hermit crabs than you really need in that stage. True, if you go a little too long, you will still have to loop through the stage and look again for the hermit crabs. But it feels like that is much more extreme in this case. For example, in this area here, we need to make sure we are unlocking doors and we're not missing any enemies hiding behind them. Because if we wander past them, guess what? We're gonna have to come back through here and do it all over again. Granted, you can rectify some of this by strategically and often using Team Blasts in areas, because the Team Blast should take care of any enemies that you can't see. As long as they're within the vicinity of the attack, they still should get destroyed. I don't think there's any kind of limits on that. But in general, yeah, this can end up taking a while. In fact, this is probably the longest stage that we're going to have to be going through so far. Not even quite halfway done yet, and the stage is even longer than not halfway done. It's a little bit of a task, and a little bit of a problem, but, you know, it does give you a chance to kind of further explore what makes each character different, and sort of how they interact with the stage. We already talked a little bit about how SBO is super unique in comparison to a lot of the different characters in the game. He has his ninja invisibility, he has his shurikens, he can stick to walls with the triangle jump where Sonic and Shadow can't, which is actually something I forgot to mention completely when I was giving my rundown of the speed characters in the last video. Yeah, I think I mentioned it once already, but the triangle jump for Sonic and Shadow, they fall off the wall after a while. SBO doesn't do that. And other than that, SBO is generally on par with Sonic and Shadow as far as speed and power. His shurikens are technically a projectile, so he does have that going for him. But like most of the sort of solo unique attacks, he doesn't really get a chance to use them that often. And it's kind of questionable why they're even there to begin with. But, you know, it's fine. It's all good. Moving on to the flying characters, though, we haven't really had much of an opportunity to talk about Charmy. As far as his base skill set goes, he has pretty much everything the other flying characters do. He's got the Thundershoot. He flies for a certain amount of time through the air based on the fullness of his sort of flying meter that pops up. But he also has, as far as a unique attack goes, a stinger attack, which makes a heck of a lot of sense. He is a bee, after all. It's just kind of a short dash forward, and it doesn't have a heck of a lot of range and is actually weirdly hard to control, but it is there. It's not bad. It's pretty fun to use when you do find yourself in those situations where Charmy is kind of fighting solo, which again, it doesn't happen too often, but it makes sense that he would be using a stinger attack, unlike Tails and Rouge randomly using dummy ring bombs, which is just something they made up for this game. I don't quite get it, but it's fine. Charmy, however, also has a unique attribute that none of the other flying characters do, and that's opening up flowers. You see them on occasion when there's these purple, robotic-looking flower plants, and when you press the B button while playing as Charmy as your leader, and the flower is nearby, he opens it up. And typically what will happen is it'll just kind of open up a portal to another part of the stage. In all reality, those flowers only show up in the Team Chaotix stages anyway, so it's kind of debatable how unique they are, I guess. Is it really just like a unique attribute when it only applies to one character? I guess. It only applies to one part of the game. It's not like you see the flowers out and about in other stages and there are other methods to open them up, to open up shortcuts and things like that. They're literally just in the Team Chaotix stages, so I guess it still counts as a unique part of the character. But yeah, Charmy does have that going for him, and it, again, plays into Team Chaotix just overall feeling way more unique and different than the other teams, which I guess is totally the point. They have their own unique mission set up, so might as well make them super unique themselves. And thankfully, as we made our run through the stage, we did not miss any enemies. So, yeah. We are officially done with that stage. I guess overall it didn't take that much longer than Sonic and Shadow's romps through the Grand Metropolis, but it still felt like it took a long time. And it could definitely take a lot longer if you're not careful about searching around every other corner for enemies. But we're going to be moving right into Team Chaotix's power plant next, which is sort of like the mission we just did, but not quite.
Here's your next mission. Remove the
So yeah, we're destroying enemies again, much like the first stage, but in this case, we're trying to find a specific kind of enemy. The golden turtle enemy, which is the more durable variant of the turtles. Typically when you're fighting those, you have to either rely on using your power character or flipping them over with your speed character. But this stage, it's a bit weird in that regard because they specifically mentioned to find and destroy 3 of them, but I don't know if there's actually more than 3 of them to destroy or not. Like, is it like the hermit crab stage where there's more than hermit crabs than you technically need, or is it like the last stage when there are specifically only 3? I don't know if venturing through this stage at all, I've ever encountered a extra golden turtle anywhere. I've played Sonic Heroes quite a bit over time, but I'm not quite that super familiar with it to that point where I remember the exact location of all of the items and golden turtles and things like that. And speaking of those robotic flowers, sometimes you find one scattered about and you can't quite access it. I'm pretty sure that's the flower you warp to if you have to cycle back through the stage and look for golden turtles some more. A lot of the Team Chaotix stages are like that just because of the mission nature, where they don't technically have an end and they just kind of go in a loop depending on how much progress you're making. And speaking of those turtles, we've got one who's heavily guarded in a cage there. But, yeah. We've got Team Blast, so we don't really have to worry about opening up the cage, technically. Though annoyingly, as seen here, their attacks can sometimes kind of linger around.
There's no way we can beat him by attacking his shell. Let's try hitting him on his stomach instead.
Yeah, you can do that, Charmy, or you could just use Team Blast. It works out either way. That's what the game wants you to do, as mentioned. You've got to try and flip them over and attack them that way. But honestly, because of the way this stage is set up, like right up here, the turtles are typically locked up behind barriers and you kind of have to unlock them. It's generally a lot easier to just kind of save up your Team Blast and then blast them away that way. It's easy enough to use the Team Blast, too. Basically, whatever action you perform, more or less, it's going to fill up the Team Blast gauge a little bit. So, if you wanted to, you can just stick around an area and just spam attacks over and over again until your Team Blast gauge is full. Or you can just collect every ring you see, or just attack every single enemy you see. It can all end up working out like that. A fun thing about Team Chaotix, though, is that their Team Blast actually helps power up their Team Blast gauge, which is a little weird. Because of the nature of their Team Blast gauge, it makes it so you get a ring container power-up for every enemy you defeat while the Team Blast gauge is in play and while it is active. So if you defeat enough enemies and thereby collect enough rings during your Team Blast, sometimes that can power up your Team Blast gauge to being completely full again, and then you can use it again immediately after. It's a bit funky how that works, but honestly, it makes it so I think Team Chaotix has the best Team Blast in the game. They all sort of have their advantages. Team Sonic's to a much lesser extent because its special ability is about defeating enemies, and a lot of the time when you use it, there are no enemies to defeat after, so it kind of goes unneeded. Team Dark's time control is pretty helpful. In the sense that it can just kind of stop the stage from moving, and that can be beneficial. And Team Rose's is just kind of crazy broken and makes you invincible. But Team Chaotix's, it lets you use a Team Blast and then power up to another Team Blast. So I think it kind of counts as being sort of amazing in its own right. And we kind of reached the end of the stage here, and it was going to force us to loop around again, so I decided to go back and look for where that other turtle might be, and we found it.
Good job. Mission complete.
Mission complete indeed. And there we go. That stage ended up taking a lot less time because there were a lot less targets to find. But at the same time, if you're not careful of where you look around, it can still end up looping around and causing you trouble if you're not careful. All in all, though, it's not too bad. The Team Chaotix stages do get much worse than this going forward.
Awesome! Totally awesome!
A for totally awesome. But of course, we're not quite done with Team Chaotix yet. We need to move into their team battle against Team Dark, because there's two sides to every fight.
I'll find Eggman's treasure first.
There's been a misunderstanding, but I doubt if they'll listen to us.
All right, then let's do it!
Whatever the reason, if they want to fight, I'll give them one. Annihilation.
This particular battle is going to go a little more how these fights usually go, if I'm being perfectly honest. With them being a bit difficult to keep track of and not quite working the way that the game says they should work. There's this very specific way that they expect you to be playing these fights, and that is kind of revolving around a sort of rock, paper, scissors mechanic with the different characters and the formations that different teams are in. You're supposed to keep track of what formation your opponent's team is in the bottom corner of the screen there. Right now, Omega's in the lead, so they're in power formation, and he's dashing around and knocking everybody off the stage, and there's not really much I can do about it when I lose SBO and Vector, and I'm trying to fight him solo with Charmy. But they essentially want you to counter the enemy team depending on what formation they're currently in. If they're in speed formation, you counter with power. If they're in power formation, you counter with flight. And if they're flight formation, you counter with speed. But from my experience with doing these fights, that usually doesn't work, like, at all. I don't know what it is, if I'm just doing something wrong somehow. It doesn't seem like it should be that complicated. But the game wants you to power up your characters with the level up orbs, the level up cores that are scattered about, and then swap to the right formation to counter whatever they're doing. Like right now, technically, that is what the game wanted me to do there. They're in power formation, you counter with flying. But no matter what, it doesn't seem like Charmy's able to do anything to get Omega to stop spamming his attacks. Really, the best thing you can do is wait until you have a team blast and then sort of take care of things and deal damage that way. Because team blasts usually will, more often than not, knock off one or two team members and make things much easier for you. It's supposed to be strategy-based, but the strategy hardly ever applies. But that's truly the end of Team Chaotix's little journey for now, and we're moving back to Team Rose for our next part. And their short romp through Grand Metropolis. Very nice. Very nice indeed.
Amy, are you sure Mr. Sonic is here?
No doubt about it. My heart is never wrong.
Then it must be so.
What a huge plant!
The buildings are so tall, it's making my head spin.
Froggy, where are you?
As usual, Big's mind is on one thing and one thing alone. Looking for Froggy. The other two pit team members there might as well not even be there in his mind's eye. Because they are just a means to an end as to finding Froggy. He could really care less whether or not they are actually there. But yeah, it's time to head through the Grand Metropolis with Team Rose and their shortened, more basic romp through the city. They start off in the same place as basically everyone else, but of course, it's going to end a lot sooner and a lot earlier than you would really expect. So, while we do have time with Team Rose here, I'd say we'll continue our talkings about the sort of unique attributes of these characters. We did, much like SBO, talk about Amy a little bit. She utilizes her hammer with most of her unique attributes and attacks. She has her solo attack, which lets her hit things with her hammer, and she has her little hammer twirl attack that allows her to fly through the air on her own for a short amount of time after you jump. But usually you're better off just not using those and just using your other team's abilities instead. And again, when Amy is solo, that doesn't really happen very often. So, you know. One unique attribute about Amy, though, that is totally unique to the, when you compare her to the other characters, rather, is the fact that her tornado move that we saw back there is actually a projectile. She uses her tornado move the same way that the other teams use the blue tornado, black tornado, and leaf swirl attacks. You jump and hit the B button. But instead of the tornado just being centered around Amy herself, it instead launches out in front of her. She shoots a projectile away from her body, which the other speed characters cannot do. And honestly, because of that, it's probably the best tornado maneuver in the game. Even though Team Rose overall, they don't have quite as many unique things going for them as the other teams, because they are supposed to be much more basic and much more simple. They're the starting point that the game kind of wants you to start playing as. In fact, another unique attribute of Team Rose that I don't think I've managed to bring up here is the fact that whenever you start a game as them the first time, it forces you to play the tutorial, whether you want to or not. There is a tutorial stage in Sonic Heroes that Team Rose, while the other character teams, you can access the tutorial with them, I think. Team Rose is the only one that has to play it, because the game pretty much expects you to be playing as them first, because they are the quote-unquote easy mode. Again, here we see, though, Amy's tornado gets launched out and knocks out the enemy shield, allowing you to more effectively attack them. And it goes quite a ways, too. You can kind of launch it through a crowd of enemies, and it'll start to disrupt the order of things. You still have to use it up close to the poles in order to be able to utilize those, of course. But overall, it's honestly pretty cool. Amy herself, because she lacks the triangle jump and light speed dash, and just due to the fact that I feel like, and I'm not sure if this is actually true or not, but it seems like Amy moves slower than the other speed characters at times. It's kind of hard to say. I don't know if that's just my mind playing tricks on me, because Amy, for the most part, in a game like Sonic Adventure, is just kind of a slower version of the typical speed-type character. I don't know if it's just me assuming things or not, but it feels like, overall, she moves a lot slower than Sonic and Shadow typically do. Or SBO, for that matter. But, altogether, though, that hammer move. Dang. Also, we passed through the gold ring for some reason, which was weird, but whatever. It's fine. We made it to the end of the stage, and that's all that matters, I guess. But yeah, Amy's got a cool tornado maneuver that the other characters don't, and that kind of adds to her fun factor, and makes her, more often than not, a little more strategic in spots than Sonic, Shadow, and SBO. Because if you're using their tornado moves, you're subject to getting hit yourself.
That was good.
It is good, Big. You don't have to worry about that with Team Rose, taking damage while using your move. It's pretty nice. And of course, we're moving right into the power plant. And remember what I said about this being a stage that kind of emphasizes the use of your flight character? The introduction to Team Rose's power plant stage starts them right off on one of the elevators here, and it is full of level up orbs for Cream. They really want you to have a powerful little bunny rabbit. And you know what? It's fine by me, because having a fully powered up flying character is usually pretty darn fun. And speaking of the flying characters, we can talk about Cream for a little bit. Again, just because of the general nature of flying characters, she doesn't have too many different unique attributes. It really all kind of comes down to her unique solo attack, which is, as you would expect if you've played Sonic Advance 2, or any of the other games that Cream happens to be playable in, is using the B button to attack enemies with her Chaotix. It is just kind of the natural way that works. So the tiny rabbit sends her best friend out to avenge and inflict justice upon her enemies. And in Sonic Advance 2, that attack is brutally broken and kind of makes Cream the best character in the game. Just because you don't have to be anywhere near an enemy to actually destroy them. And it makes boss fights incredibly broken and brutal. Brutal towards the boss themselves, I should say. Because again, you don't have to be anywhere near them to actually attack them. In Sonic Heroes, unfortunately, that's not really the case. It's just kind of there because it has to be there. And I don't think I've ever actually seen Cheese make contact with an enemy and destroy them in this game. Because, I'm not sure if this is me just assuming things, but it feels like, first of all, Cream has to be by herself to use the attack, which is standard for the solo attacks. But also, it feels like Cheese's attack will get canceled out when the team regroups, which is usually a lot sooner and faster than you would expect. So, when you send Cheese out to attack something, Cheese very often doesn't even get a chance to make it to their target before the team regroups and everyone lines back up into their positions. Including Cheese, actually, who, at all times when you're in flying formation, just kind of hangs out above the team. They're supporting. Cheese is a very supportive friend, you see. So, what used to be an insanely brutal attack that made Cream like a top-tier Sonic character, unfortunately is no longer really a thing, which is terribly disappointing. But we don't really have too much time to think about it because we are at the end of the stage again. And that's just about how Team Rose goes. But overall, you know, it's not too bad. It gives you a little bit of a breather between the other, like, brutally long stages and things like that. So it's fun. Team Rose is fun. They're basic, they're simple, but they're fun. And they do have those kind of unique quirks that some of the other teams don't. So, in a way, it's kind of a shame you don't get to use them more often, actually.
I'm so happy I want to tell everyone!
You should. You better do that. And to finish things off, of course, we need to go right into the boss battle against Team Sonic with Team Rose.
Amy, knock it off! There's no time to play!
Sonic, give up! This time you're mine! Mr. Sonic, isn't the caller with you?
Soggy, where are you? My turn.
An important thing to note about these fights is the fact that while you are fighting the other team, they can in fact collect the items and stuff around the stage as well. There's not really much of a point to the rings, honestly, aside from boosting your team blast gauge. But you definitely do want to try and collect the level orbs scattered around the battle arena here, because it does make it that much easier to knock out the enemy team in most situations. But it's very important to note that they can collect them as well. Knuckles has 2 of them, actually. And I want to say, at least in this case, there are only 3 each scattered around the stage. So once they're collected, you can't really get any more. If the enemy team gets to them first, you're kind of out of luck, and it'll make them a little bit harder to deal with. But overall, still, if you just kind of keep at it, the fight will end eventually, and the enemy team will go down. Kind of weird, but it's fine. And that's it for right now. Thank you very much for watching. This is your good friend Sparky signing off, and I'll catch you later.